What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from the place, SBMTG down there, here in the YouTube house. Yeah, fun fact, I bet you didn't know, but all YouTubers actually live in one big house together. It gets a little crazy sometimes. It's totally true, I promise. But anyway, what we're going to do today is talk about a deck that is my favorite kind of deck. Shamelessly, it's a bit of a guilty pleasure, but today's deck is a big, stupid, fun pile of janky synergy and dreams. We're going to talk about Super Forge today. Now, sometimes I call this deck Mystic Spiral, but I'm thinking about changing the name, and there's no way you get that reference. But anyway, I've been looking pretty hard at Mystic Forge ever since it was spoiled during spoiler season, because that's when cards get spoiled. Just a pro tip. But anyway, this card, I've been really wanting to experiment with a frenzy of colorless cards, if you see what I did there. And the only problem is that there's a major stipulation. We can only play colorless stuff, artifacts and colorless non-land permanents off of Mystic Forge. But that's totally okay because 30 cards in this deck, literally half the deck, are exactly that. They fit that descriptor. So sometimes we can go crazy and have even longer turns than you'll take off of an experimental frenzy. Now, despite the feel-good vibe, I don't want to downplay the amount of deck building concessions one has to make. When building around this card, it's kind of a lot, because it's not just so simple as being able to throw a bunch of colorless cards in your deck and like, oh, it works miraculously, I'm playing 30 spells a turn. It's not. You're not going to do that. Turns out you have to also play a relatively low curve when possible. You just don't have infinite mana. There's also the fact you can't play a whole lot of lands, which kind of dovetails from the first point nicely. You can only play about 20 or even fewer lands in this deck because you don't want to get stuck on lands. Yeah, the first card is free with Mystic Forge because you can always just tap your Forge, get rid of that card off the top of your library. But sometimes you'll hit multiple lands in a turn, and when you do that, it feels really, really bad. So we want to play minimal lands in this thing so that we can, again, extend those turns as much as possible. And there have been several occasions where these big long turns you can take with a Mystic Forge is just too much, literally too much for some opponents. Like, for example, here's a game where a Davriel player realizes that them making us discard a card or two every turn is really no match for the amount of card advantage that Mystic Forge can generate in a given turn. Well, you're probably asking me, like, why I'm only playing 3 copies if it's the most important card in the deck. Well, that's a really good question, so I should answer that. First of all, after the first Mystic Forge, you kind of don't want to see any more Mystic Forges. They don't do you a whole lot of good. They're just a random 4-drop on top of your library that's kind of hard to play. So you don't really want that. Now, we're also only playing 3 copies of Forge because we're playing a couple of copies of Karn in the deck. Well, we got a couple of Karns, to be honest. Just being up front with you, we got a couple of Karns. But Karn the Great Creator specifically, because I wanted to go ahead and get to this card towards the beginning of the video to emphasize how important it is. Yep, it's one of those decks. Now, first of all, we've tooled our entire sideboard around this. We're playing a bunch of like one-of artifacts and stuff for a bunch of different situations so that Karn can help us out no matter what. And one of those artifacts is a Mystic Forge. So in a way, we are playing 4 copies. Really, if you want to put it this way, 5 copies of Mystic Forge in the main deck because we've got 3 actual Forges and 2 Karns to go search up the Forge from the sideboard. along with a lot of other different artifacts. The sideboard is going to be a whole thing this time around, but the other cool thing about Karn is that you can turn artifacts into creatures and just get them swinging in. So it's a way, in a way, to finish the game. A sort of win condition, and we need a few of those. We've got a couple of specific ones that we're hoping to get, but Karn is one of the more important ones because it does multiple things for the deck. And hey, it can even make a Mystic Forge swing in. In a way, Mystic Forge is kind of the biggest artifact in the entire deck, so it's going to be one of your best attackers on some turns. But now it's on to the real win conditions in the deck, because we ended up playing one copy of Mishra's Self-Replicator, 2 copies of Saheeli, and 2 copies of Sai in this thing. Now, starting with Saheeli and Sai here, these are both more or less for the same thing. We want to go off on big, super long turns with Mystic Forge, play 2 or 3 1 or 2 drop artifacts, and end up getting a bunch of creatures off of them. But they're good for other reasons too. Sometimes we can copy an artifact and turn it into a much bigger creature via Saheeli. That's nice. Or we can just use Sai to draw a couple of extra cards and keep chains of turns going, or get a bad card off the top of our library so we can continue a Mystic Forge turn. But it's Replicator that I really want to talk about here, because this is what's going to win you the game in many situations, so long as you can set it up. Now, this isn't the only copy in the deck. We've also got a copy in the sideboard that Karn can go search up if need be, but very often the one is all you need, because you'll play another artifact and then you'll get another copy of it, and even if your opponent takes out the original, it doesn't matter. It'll still lead to turns where you're going off with Mystic Forge and you're able to generate just a buttload, I almost did it, a buttload of tokens all in the same turn or over a 2-turn span. Like, for instance, here's a turn where we literally have 30 Mishra Self-Replicator tokens out. But that's not it for win conditions in the deck. I already spoiled this, but we're playing a couple of other copies of Khorne in the deck. Old Carl, Scion of Urza. This is actually awesome for multiple reasons too. Another card advantage engine, which is kind of sweet. Another thing that can wipe cards off the top of your library while you're going off with Mystic Forge. That's pretty cool. So synergy right there, but also it just makes like 9/9 guys. Whoops. Like an awful lot of the time, very often, you'll at least get like a 7/7 off of this if you drop it in the mid to late game, but there have been other times where 9/9 is quite feasible with this card. But believe it or not, we're actually not done with token creating win conditions that do more than one thing, actually, because we're also playing 2 copies of Mugen the Ineffable. Now, I've already said we can't really play a high land count in this deck, and a lot of our cards need to be relatively low on the curve, and then I proceeded to show you a bunch of 4, 5, and 6 drops. So don't worry, we're getting to a bunch of 1 and 2 drop artifacts before too long here, but Mugen is one of the other more important cards in the deck, because once you get it down, if you have a Mystic Forge out, suddenly you can really go off, kid, because this is going to decrease the cost of half of your deck by 2. But oh yeah, it makes tokens and stuff. Like, it has more than just a passive ability. It makes tokens and stuff, and that can be nice. Any way to get creatures on the battlefield is something we're interested in when it comes to colorless cards. And it also gets other cards off of the battlefield. Another thing we're interested in, because we really don't have a whole lot of defense in this deck. So that's kind of all the big stuff. Now we just have to build a bunch of like small-ish artifacts around this strategy and try to optimize it as much as we can. So let me go ahead and start talking about these, with 4 copies of Fountain of Renewal, as well as 4 copies of Traveler's Amulet, and 1 copy of Bag of Holding. Now, Bag of Holding has been cut from 3 copies at the beginning of things here to 1 copy at the end of things here. I was loath to actually drop the card from the deck, because sometimes it does do work, but it didn't quite do as much work as I wanted it to be honest. 2 mana is a lot, 4 mana is a million, but that said, it can, for just 2 mana, wipe the top card of your library, get you something different when you have your Mystic Forge in play. That's pretty nice. Plus, looting isn't the worst thing in the world, let's be honest, so I at least wanted the 1 copy of Bag of Holding, because we need cheap artifacts anyway, but I almost never want to see multiple copies of this over a given game anyway. Fountain of Renewal, on the other hand, is the exact opposite. I want to see as many copies of this over a given game as I possibly can, because it does multiple things. In the relative early game, this can be a great way to present a speed bump to aggro that also, again, lets us wipe a card off the top of our library in the mid to late game if we're trying to go off on a Forge turn. And Traveler's Amulet, if you're not sick of hearing this yet, can also get rid of the top card of your library. There's a bunch of cards in this deck that do that, but we need that because we want to be able to just keep rocking rocking and rolling and get rid of lands on top of our library, or get rid of something on top of our library we can't cast, and we've already tapped our Mystic Forge for the turn. So we need a ton of cards that do that. Luckily, Traveler's Amulet will go and get us a land and shuffle our deck, meaning it'll change the top card on Forge turn. So all of that's important. It also effectively lowers the land count while itself being a small artifact that helps out the deck in multiple ways. You got to play all 4 Amulet. Now into the 2-drop artifacts, we're playing 4 copies of Guild Globe, 3 copies of Treasure Map, and a copy of Azor's Gateway. Just to kind of keep things fresh here, instead of playing all 4 Treasure Map, we'll play a copy of Azor's Gateway, which you will never flip, or at least I have never flipped it. The entire time I've been trying to play this deck, it just has not happened. But at the same time, again, looting is good, and it's a small artifact. It too gets the top card off the top of your library sometimes, and Treasure Map does that too. Treasure Map as well will sometimes wipe the top card so you can keep going on a Mystic Forge turn, but it's also a card advantage piece in the late game, explodes onto the board with more mana advantage so that you can just sack treasures if you need more mana to keep a Forge turn going. Treasure Map is a very important card for the deck too, but so is Guild Globe. Guild Globe. I'll get it right one of these days. It's hard to do double G's. Guild Globe is just perfect for a deck like this. Wants to play small artifacts, wants to draw cards, and wants to draw specific pieces. So an early game piece of card advantage like this is great, but if we're going off with Mystic Forge, it's also sweet because it'll allow us to just get more and more card advantage, more and more board presence, and it's super sweet if you have, say, an Mugen out while you're going through a Mystic Forge turn, because it's effectively 0 mana, draw a card, which is always sweet. Oh, and by the way, if you're having trouble casting a Saheeli or another card in the deck that I'll get to in a minute here, just any card that has multiple colors in its casting cost or whatever, then Guild Globe can help you do that too. It's just amazing all the things this little 2-mana artifact can do for you. Now the final artifact in the deck is 4 copies of Power Stone Shard. And I've waffled back and forth between this and Chromatic Lantern a couple of times, but even though we are playing some cards that actually have colors in their casting costs, as amazing as that sounds, I still think we can get away with playing Power Stone Shard in the deck. We've got plenty of colored sources in the mana base to play the cards that we're playing, plus Traveler's Amulet, Guild Globe to make mana if we need to. We've got tricks if we need to have tricks for that. But more importantly, I think, is keeping those Forge turns going to make them as long as possible, and sometimes you need a buttload of mana for that. And really, if you have, say, an Mugen out in a Mystic Forge, then the first Power Stone Shard you play is effectively free because it costs 2 less, and you can tap it for a mana when it enters the battlefield. So that one was free, but any more Power Stone Shards that you play will then begin to generate mana for you, which is a really important thing to be able to do when you're going off. So I think Power Stone Shard is probably the better call for the deck than any other 3-mana rock. But we're actually not done with the deck here. There are a couple of more cards left here that are necessary evils that I didn't even want to play, but you kind of have to make room for some removal, or you're just going to get run over by every deck in the format. So we're playing 2 copies of Prison Realm and 3 copies of Deafening Clarion. Prison Realm is just great. The Scry is actually really sweet on this card in a deck like this that needs multiple important cards on turn 4 specifically. So a turn 3 Prison Realm against Teferi or something like that can really help set up your next draw. But Prison Realm is going to be great at any point in the game. We really don't have a whole lot of creatures, especially early, to attack with. So we really don't have a way of wiping planeswalkers or standing up to other creatures, things our opponent plays. So we just need interaction, period. And Prison Realm is very good at taking off the biggest threat from the other side of the table and buying us a turn or two. That's very important, but Deafening Clarion is a great reset button. We've got Sai and Saheeli in this deck, but I kind of don't care. Against aggro decks, you need this in order to just not die. Even if you do have a board full of servos and Mishra's Self-Replicators and Thopters and stuff like that, you can still use Deafening Clarion to give your creatures lifelink, and that's very important some of the time too. So no matter what you're using it for or what position you're in, this can be a very important card for a deck like this, and even though they look wonky, you just can't get away with not playing interaction in this deck. Now, there are 20 lands in the deck. Again, we got to keep it really, really low here so we can keep those Forge turns going, but we still manage 10 white, 10 blue, and 11 red, believe it or not. I keep doing it. I have to stop. I can at this point, but anyway, that is plenty when you consider that we also have, again, Guild Globe and Traveler's Amulet to find important basic lands. So that it doesn't look like much, but it turns out this is plenty at the end of the day, especially considering, again, half the deck is colorless. Now here's that crazy sideboard we were talking about. The only non-one of here is Steel Overseer. And there's a lot of reasons this is in the board. You probably expected to see it in the main, but I didn't want to play a creature that can die to Deafening Clarion in the same deck with Deafening Clarion. Now, that said, over the course of a couple of turns, this can make all your creatures, including itself, go above your own Deafening Clarion, but that takes so long to set up, and it's very easy to see coming. So I'm just not sure that this card is good for the main deck, because I felt like I wanted to sweep the board against our opponent in game one more than I wanted to play Steel Overseer in game one. But the blow is cushioned a little bit by the fact that even if it is game one, the Great Creator can go and get a Steel Overseer for us and help us start going above our opponent. So the card is still playable in game one and will very often be searched up by Karn. As far as the one-ofs in the deck, we've got Manifold Key. This can untap the odd artifact here or there, but it's mostly in there to make those big 7/7, 8/8 Karn tokens go unblocked and just end the game that way. So that's one avenue to victory. Manifold Key can make sure that your opponent doesn't just chump block a 9/9 every turn and laugh at you. That's important. Wand of Vertebrae, yet another thing that can just get a card off the top of our library if we need it to do that. It's a cheap artifact, so sometimes there have been plenty of turns actually where if you're just trying to go off and play cheap artifacts because you've got a bunch of self-replicators on the table and you want to make like 8 more, then you just go get a Wand of Vertebrae out of your sideboard, or a Manifold Key for that matter. Just pay 1 mana for it, and then make like 6 or 7 self-replicator tokens or whatever you have the mana for. So there's a reason that we have some cheap artifacts in here too. There's also Arcane Encyclopedia, just another card draw engine. Chaos Wand, another one of the most searched up cards with Karn the Great Creator. This can just wreck control opponents and all kinds of people. I mean, most decks play instants and sorceries, right? Chaos Wand is just incredible. A lot of the time it's really overperformed, even in game 1, due to Karn the Great Creator, for me at least. But there's also Transmogrifying Wand in here while we're on the subject of wands. We've got a bunch of them in the sideboard now that I think about it, but this is a great removal piece in that it can just shoot down big creatures that would otherwise kill you and turn them into oxes that aren't necessarily harmless, but much more harmless than a Lyra Dawnbringer or another similar giant creature, or Hydroid Krasis or something. So that's a nice card to have. There's also Salvager of Ruin for tricks. You know, there's been plenty of times where you can, minus Karn the Great Creator and send it to the graveyard and get your salvage, Salvager of Ruin, and then play it, get your Karn back from the graveyard and play it with fresh loyalty. That's one trick, but there are plenty of things you can do, whether or not you get rid of one of your artifacts for whatever reason, or you get rid of one of your planeswalkers by playing another one to refresh the loyalty. Well, Salvager can just get whatever died back to your hand, or maybe your opponent removes something in combat or with a spell. Again, Salvager is great in those situations, but I don't want it in the main deck. It's just pretty much only good out of the sideboard in very specific situations, but that's why we have a card like Karn. We've also got that 4th copy of Mystic Forge in there, the 2nd copy of Mishra's Self-Replicator, a copy of Godpharaoh's Statue to slow them down, and just make sure that we win the game in extremely long games, if that's what we're in for, because this is going to ping them for a point of damage every turn, and it's just free damage. And some games are going to go long. It's actually pretty sweet against certain decks, but there's also Meteor Golem in there as just removal against whatever huge thing they just played. And once we get a Power Stone Shard or two, this card costs almost nothing effectively to cast, so I've taken out plenty of things with this, Liliana's included, so it's just a great card out of the board. There's the Immortal Sun in there. Yeah, this shuts down Planeswalker abilities other than passives, which is, in some cases like Mugen, what we're most looking at. Or a card like Saheeli, we really care about the passive. We don't ever have to use the minus on Saheeli. But the Immortal Sun will help us draw more cards, pay less mana for our spells on Forge turn, make our Mishra Self-Replicators all 3/3s and stuff, our Thopters 2/2s. Just everything the card does is awesome, and I kind of don't care if I can never activate Great Creator again, so long as we have an Immortal Sun out. But there's also a Sphinx of the Guild Pact in there, is just a huge flying creature that can close out games quickly. And whew, that was the board. I think I did that succinctly enough, but let me go ahead and roll you into our power rankings here. A final score of 59. 59? That's not a great score, but that's just It is what it is this time, y'all. This is a meme deck and a theme deck more than anything else. It's kind of, again, more of you gotta live your janky dreams, y'all, some of the times. And I'm not ashamed to put a deck like that on the internet. It's one of the reasons my channel exists in the first place, is because I am a jank lord, and I love stuff like this. I'm not going to pretend it's the most competitive deck in the world. It has been tough to pick games up with this some of the times on Arena, but I'm also not going to tell you this deck isn't the most fun I've had all season, especially on big long turns where you're just going off with Forge, you got an Mugen on the battlefield, you just play like 8 artifacts this turn. I don't even care that I don't have a Sai or a Saheeli out or something. I don't care. I'm just having fun over here playing all of my spells. But there are going to be turns where you put the whole thing together, you get a Mystic Forge, you get an Mugen, which you don't actually have to have, and you have a Sai and a Saheeli out. Mishra's Self-Replicator is just making you all the tokens in the world. Here's that game where we have 1 billion tokens on the battlefield again, just as proof that this can happen. It's just such a ridiculously fun deck to play around with, and when it's actually, you know, in gear and firing on all cylinders, this can be a winning deck to play too. You just gotta, again, you gotta assemble all the jigsaw pieces. Now, for what it's worth, this is the most powerful, winning, and consistent build of the deck I've been able to come up with so far. So if you're interested in trying it out, then just click the first link in the description. You know how it works by now. Just go over to TCG Player. Get the deck for as cheap as you can possibly get it on the entire interwebs. But this is kind of where you come in. I really want to know how you do this deck differently. Let me know down in the comment sections there, because I have tried a bunch of different stuff with this deck. I've tried all colorless, didn't win any games. I've tried, you know, just red-blue with Saheeli and Sai, didn't win games. Yeah, Deafening Clarion and Prison Realm, suddenly it started winning some games. But let me know how you feel about it and how you change it and how you do it differently down there in the comments section, because I don't think that this deck is in its, like, you know, Super Saiyan Shining Rainbow final form quite yet. So if you have any suggestions, definitely get at me down there in the comments. Aside from that, though, I guess that's it for this one. As soon as you like and subscribe, please do the YouTube things. I try to pretend like I don't care, like, oh yeah, do the stuff on your way out. I don't, whatever. What accent is this? Anyway, I try to pretend like I don't care, but seriously, it really helps me out and it makes me feel really good when you like and subscribe. So do the things. And aside from that, I'm done for this one. But that doesn't mean we're done with decks. I got a whole bunch of decks to do. But starting in August, I'm gonna go ahead and announce this just so everybody knows. Starting in August, we're going to start doing rotation-proof decks until spoiler season hits for Archery, which is the code name of the next set that hits in the fall. So we will start doing rotation-proof decks soon. I've gotten a few comments about that in the recent past this season, so don't worry. But up until August, we're still going to see what we can do with this environment, because it's actually a really cool environment. A full standard is something you don't get every day, and it's nice to play around in. So indulge me. I'm going to be doing non-rotation-proof decks all up and through till the end of July, but in August, you'll get your rotation-proof cookies. So keep that in mind. But I guess I'm about done here. I guess if you want to support my content, you go to my Patreon, link in the description, or patreon.com/SBMTG. I give you stuff for giving me stuff. Don't worry. But aside from that, I'm done. So I guess I'll catch you cats later. Hope you enjoyed Super Forge. I am Deb from the place. But thanks for watching, my wizards. This is all out of order. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind. Yep, I got a meal, got an inheritance, it's bigger than an elephant. How I got it's irrelevant. I'm staying at the Sheridan, I'll wax you like some paraffin. And he giving me Hercules. That's Wednesday in American now. Let down your hair and dance.